They used my hose and water supply without permission. Smirking, "You have plenty to share." Furious, I installed a lock on the spigot. They shouted, "You're so petty." I replied, "Buy your own water." Their outrage as they realized they'd have to pay their own utility bill was the best revenge. I never thought moving into my own home would lead to such a mess. After years of saving, I finally bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Illinois. The place had a small garden, a white picket fence, and a driveway just big enough for my old sedan. Felt like a dream come true. The first few weeks were peaceful. I spent my evenings planting flowers and getting to know the rhythms of my new street. Most of the neighbors were friendly but kept to themselves, which suited me fine. Then there were the Millers. They lived right next door in a larger house with a sprawling lawn. Mr. Miller was a tall man with a booming voice, always seen tinkering with his car or mowing the lawn. Mrs. Miller was petite with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. They had 2 teenage kids who were often out with friends. Our initial interactions were polite nods and the occasional wave. I didn't think much of it until one Saturday afternoon. I had just returned from the grocery store, arms laden with bags, when I noticed something odd. My garden hose was stretched across the lawn into the Miller's driveway. Water was gushing out and Mr. Miller was using it to wash their SUV. I stood there for a moment, processing the scene. Taking a deep breath, I walked over. "Excuse me," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I couldn't help but notice you're using my hose." Mr. Miller looked up, water droplets glistening on his face. He grinned, showing perfect white teeth. "Oh, hey. Hope you don't mind. We figured since your spigot was right there, it'd be easier." I was taken aback. "Well, it's connected to my water supply and I pay the bill. I'd prefer if you used your own." Mrs. Miller appeared from behind the car, wiping her hands on a rag. She had a smirk that didn't sit right with me. "Come on, it's just water. You have plenty to share." I felt my face flush. "That's not the point. It's about permission and respect." Mr. Miller's grin faded. "Didn't think it'd be such a big deal." I forced a smile. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't use my things without asking." Turning on my heel, I walked back to my house, heart pounding. I hoped that would be the end of it. But the following week, I came home to find my hose sprawled across the lawn again, water pooling near the spigot. The Millers were nowhere in sight. Frustrated, I decided to take action. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a spigot lock. It was a simple device that fit over the faucet handle, preventing unauthorized use. Installing it gave me a sense of relief. That evening, as I was watering my plants, Mrs. Miller came over. She leaned on the fence, watching me. "Really? A lock," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. I met her gaze. "Yes. I thought it was necessary." She scoffed. "You're being petty." I set down the watering can. "It's my water, my bill. I think it's fair to expect others not to use it without permission." She rolled her eyes. Unbelievable. The tension was thick. I didn't want a feud, but I also wasn't going to be taken advantage of. Over the next few days, the Millers made their displeasure known. Loud comments about certain neighbors and exaggerated stories about generosity floated over the fence. I chose to ignore them, focusing on my own business. Then, one morning, I found my trash can overturned, garbage strewn across the driveway. Coincidence? Maybe. But my gut told me otherwise. I decided to install security cameras around my property. Not just because of the Millers, but for general safety. The cameras were discreet, but visible enough to act as a deterrent. A week later, the footage confirmed my suspicions. Around midnight, Mr. Miller was seen tipping over my trash can. I had proof. I faced a dilemma. Confronting them could escalate things, but staying silent felt like giving them a free pass. After much contemplation, I decided to report the incident to the local authorities, providing them with the footage. An officer visited the Millers the next day. I watched from my window as they spoke on the porch. Mrs. Miller's face was a mix of shock and anger. After the officer left, she stormed over to my house. I opened the door before she could knock. "How dare you involve the police?" she hissed. I remained calm. I had evidence of property damage. I thought it was the right thing to do. Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this." She turned and marched back to her house. Days passed without incident. I started to feel a bit more relaxed, thinking maybe they finally got the message. Maybe the whole water issue, the trash stunt, even the cop visit had been enough to put an end to the nonsense. But no. That peace didn't last. It was a Tuesday night. I was making dinner when the lights in my kitchen flickered and then cut out completely. I checked the rest of the house. Nothing. Total blackout. I looked out the window. Every other house on the block still had lights on. Street lamps were glowing, porch lights were shining. It was just me. At first, I thought maybe I'd forgotten to pay the bill, but that didn't make sense. I'd paid it a week earlier and I had the receipt in my inbox. So I stepped outside with a flashlight, walked around the side of my house toward the breaker box. And that's when I saw it. The cover of the box was hanging loose. Someone had opened it. I reached out and flipped it open. The main breaker had been switched off. I stood there in the dark for a moment, my heart pounding. This wasn't just pettiness anymore. This was something else. I flipped the breaker back on. The lights inside came back immediately. Relief, then rage. I didn't even bother to call the cops this time. I went straight to my computer and pulled up the footage from the security cameras. And there it was. Clear as day. At 8:42 p.m., Mrs. Miller, hoodie on, face turned slightly but still her, walked casually up the side of my house. She opened the breaker box, flipped the switch, and walked away like she was taking out the trash. I downloaded the footage and saved it to a flash drive. I made copies. One in the cloud, one on a USB in my drawer, and one in my safe. If they wanted to play games, I was going to be prepared. But here's where things started to get even messier. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed something new on the Miller's lawn. A handmade sign, big enough to be read from across the street. It said, "Our neighbor loves calling the cops. Please wave to the snitch." I stared at it, stunned. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, but because this had turned into something so ridiculous, so childish, that I could hardly believe two grown adults were behind it. But I didn't engage. I didn't walk over. I didn't knock on their door. I just went to work, came home, kept to myself. And then the letters started. At first, they were left on my porch, notes in sloppy handwriting, and signed. Things like, "You think you're better than everyone? We see what kind of person you really are. Hope your flowers die from all that stolen water you hoarded." I threw them away. Every time. Until one day, I found one shoved under my windshield wiper at the grocery store. Now it was following me off my property. That's when I started documenting everything. Dates, times, pictures, recordings. I even started wearing a body cam when doing yard work or walking to my mailbox. The cops said without a direct threat or more evidence, their hands were tied. But they took my reports and added them to the growing file. One of the officers gave me a tired look and said, "You'd be surprised how many neighbor wars we deal with." Still, that didn't stop them. A few nights later, I came home to find someone had poured motor oil across my driveway. Slippery, thick, black lines that took me over an hour to clean. Again, no proof it was them, but I knew. That weekend, I had a friend over. We sat on my porch, sharing a beer, just talking. Mr. Miller stepped out, shirtless, holding a hose, his own hose, finally, and loudly said, "Hope you're not spreading more lies about your neighbors. Word gets around." My friend looked at me confused. I just smiled and said nothing. That moment right there told me they weren't just being petty. They were obsessed. Obsessed with the fact that I wouldn't play their game. Then came the real twist. One night I got a knock at the door. It was their teenage son. He looked nervous, hands in his hoodie pocket. "Hey," he said, "can I talk to you for a sec?" I nodded, a bit unsure, and stepped outside. He looked over his shoulder toward his house, then back at me. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he said. I blinked. "For what?" "My parents. They've been off. Ever since we moved here. They think everyone's out to get them. They didn't used to be like this." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to grill him. Ask him if he'd seen them sneak onto my property, if he knew about the notes or the breaker stunt. But he looked genuinely upset. He kicked at a stone on the walkway. "I'm applying for colleges soon. I just want to live somewhere normal. Get away from all this." I nodded slowly. "I hope you do." He turned and left, and I stood there for a long time. The drama wasn't over. But something had shifted. They weren't just annoying neighbors. Something darker was going on next door. After the talk with their son, things quieted down for about 2 weeks. No new notes, no vandalism, no sarcastic signs. The quiet was eerie. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they had come to their senses. Maybe the kid said something that got through to them. But that's not what happened. It was a Saturday morning when the next twist hit me. I was sipping coffee on the porch, enjoying the rare moment of peace, when a white SUV pulled up in front of my house. A woman stepped out, blazer, sunglasses, clipboard in hand. She looked official. "Are you Mr. Andrews?" she asked. "Yeah. I'm with Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip about a possible case of neglect involving your interactions with a minor." I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She glanced down at her clipboard. "A report was made stating you've had repeated interactions with the teenage male next door, and it's raised concerns." My blood ran cold. I knew immediately who had done this. I explained everything, the neighbor drama, the late-night stunt with the power, the notes, the harassment. She listened, professionally neutral, but I could see the shift in her posture as I laid out the history, including the footage and the police reports. She nodded, handed me her card, and said, "We'll make a note. It's not uncommon in cases like this for retaliation to be disguised as concern. If anything else happens, document it." As soon as she left, I sat on my porch, heart racing, staring across the lawn at the Miller's house. False accusations now. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just walked inside, pulled out the flash drive again, added her visit to the file, and made copies of everything again. A week later, I had a landscaping crew scheduled. I wanted to build a taller privacy fence, maybe add a few tall shrubs, just to put more space between us. When the workers arrived, I stepped outside to greet them and saw Mrs. Miller standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching. 2 hours into the job, the city showed up. A man in a neon vest and clipboard walked up and asked for a permit. "What permit?" I asked. "You filed for landscape work that alters the boundary. Anything over 6 feet tall needs a permit in this neighborhood." I hadn't known. That was on me. But I'd bet my life she was the one who called it in. Fine. I took down the taller panels, put up the allowed ones. Still looked nice. Still blocked most of the view. The next morning, I found dog poop in my garden bed. It wasn't from a stray. It was too deliberately placed. And it happened 3 more times that week. So I installed 1 more camera, this time angled toward the back fence. And just like that, I caught her. Early morning. Hoodie. Plastic bag. Poop drop. Clean getaway. Or so she thought. I sent the footage to the HOA this time instead of the police. Our HOA is small, but petty issues like these are their bread and butter. And they responded fast. The HOA president showed up at my door with a clipboard and a slight smirk. "We've had our issues with the Millers before," he said. "You're not the first." That shocked me. He leaned in slightly. "Just keep your file clean. We'll take it from here." I didn't know what that meant at the time, but the next week I saw the Millers having a very loud argument on their porch with 2 HOA reps. I couldn't hear what was being said, but it ended with Mrs. Miller slamming the door so hard it rattled the window panes. Still, I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Then another twist. I came home from work one day and my front door was wide open. Panic. I rushed inside, nothing stolen, nothing broken. But my kitchen drawers had been rifled through. My home office too. A few papers were on the floor. My flash drives? Still there. But clearly someone had been inside. I called the cops again. They did a report, but with no sign of forced entry. They said it might have been someone with a copy of the key. That didn't sit right with me. I changed the locks after moving in. No one else had them, unless someone picked the lock. Or worse, unless someone got in another way. That night I checked the backyard. The basement window, one I never used, had faint scuff marks near the latch. Dirt on the sill. It wasn't broken, but it looked like it had been tampered with. Enough. I installed new locks, reinforced the windows, bought a deadbolt and a door camera, put up a protected by surveillance sign even though I hated how it looked. And I filed for a restraining order. That process took weeks, statements, proof, more footage. But I wasn't backing down. One night, while sitting at my desk, watching the street from my window, I saw their teenage son again. This time, standing in the driveway, looking directly at my house. He didn't say anything, didn't come over. He just stood there. Then he shook his head slowly, like he was disappointed, and walked back inside. And that hit me in a weird way, like somehow I was losing something, too. Not just peace and quiet, but faith in people. That was the night I realized this story might not end soon. But I wasn't going to be the one to crack first. A few more weeks passed. The air between our houses was like a stretched rubber band. One wrong move and it was going to snap. But I stayed quiet. Until one Friday evening, something inside me broke. I had just gotten home from work. Tired. Burned out. And there, sitting on my porch in a paper bag, was a pile of dog poop again. Only this time it was lit on fire. The old prank. The kind you see in stupid movies. I stomped it out, smelled the stench and just snapped. I didn't call the police. I didn't check my cameras. I walked straight to my garage, opened my tool chest, and grabbed a can of fluorescent orange spray paint. It was petty. I'll admit that now. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking straight. I walked over to the sidewalk in front of the Miller's house, bent down, and in bold block letters, I wrote, "Free water thieves live here underneath." I added, "They steal, they lie, they poop." It took 45 seconds. Then I went back inside, sat on the porch with a beer, and waited. It didn't take long. Mrs. Miller saw it first when she came out to check her mailbox. Her scream could have broken glass. Then Mr. Miller came out, storming toward my property, finger pointing. "You're gonna regret this, you psycho." I didn't even flinch. I held up my phone. One step on my lawn, and I call the cops again. I have everything on video. He stopped. He knew I wasn't bluffing. "Clean it up," he barked. "Nope," I said. "Let the whole neighborhood see it." The next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA. Turns out, public shaming with paint wasn't allowed either. I got a warning and had to scrub the sidewalk. Fine. But that wasn't the ending. That was just the setup. The ending came 2 days later when I got a knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It was a woman in a business suit along with a man in city inspector gear. "Are you aware your neighbor has filed a formal complaint that you've been tapping into their utilities?" she asked. I blinked, shocked. "What?" "They claim you've been siphoning water and power through their outdoor outlets. We're here to inspect and follow protocol." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the insanity never ended. "Come in. You'll find nothing. But while you're at it, maybe you should inspect their outdoor spigots and see how many hoses go missing on the side." They didn't find anything on me, of course. But 2 days later, after inspecting both properties, they found something buried on the Miller side. An illegal extension hose running underground into the back of another neighbor's property. Yep. They were stealing another neighbor's water, not just mine. That's when it all started to unravel. Turns out Mr. Miller had done this before in their last neighborhood. It was part of why they had moved. And with the new evidence, police reopened my prior complaints, the notes, the power tampering, the false CPS call. All of it. That's when the cops came knocking on their door. This time, not just to talk. They were charged with multiple counts of property damage, harassment, and fraud. I handed over every piece of footage I had. Even the childish ones. And then, the cherry on top, the CPS lady called me again weeks later just to apologize. "It's been cleared. We flagged the tip as malicious. Thank you for your patience. But here's where I admit something. I didn't need to paint that message on their sidewalk. I didn't need to stoop that low. I made that choice. And though I won't say I regret it because it was satisfying in the moment, it also turned me into someone I didn't like. Someone fueled by spite. In the end, they got what was coming. Their house went up for sale shortly after the charges. Quietly. No goodbye. They left one night, no moving truck, no warning. I stood on my porch, watching the for sale sign go up. And I felt nothing. No joy. No relief. Just silence. I won the war, but it cost me something too. That's how neighbor wars go, I guess. No one comes out the same.